So some caveats here. First of all, I feel horrible, and it's not because I'm hungover, shockingly. I seem to have acquired some disease in transit, so I spent all last night actually in bed asleep, and I've now whacked out on orange juice until my eyes are swimming, and Advil and some other odds and ends. So if I do just kind of curl up in a ball, just do sock puppets for a while, and everything will all work out. It seemed like there was something other important thing I was going to say, but it's probably not that important. Anyway, we're here to talk about trusted computing. I really appreciate y'all showing up for this. Given the lineup for the 10 o'clock between Litchfield and Ophir and Halvar and Kaminsky and Dr. What's his name? I can't remember his name. It's quite a selection, so I certainly appreciate you coming here. But if it sounds funnier in the other rooms, I'll let you go. You can go somewhere else. Anyway, humor engine's still starting up. Two-stroke, you got to pull it a few times. For those that have seen me speak before, standard issue slide number 2, don't believe anything I say, all right? Security industry is in a really fun state right now because there's a lot of money in it. It's also a very dangerous state right now because there's a lot of money in it. And so the honest brokers that we used to have many of whom are now gainfully employed and have other agendas besides being an honest broker. And these conferences get, before I used to have this slide up because there were people who were on stage saying things that sometimes just weren't technically sound. You know, we didn't have the academic discipline in this community to say bullshit, you know, when something wasn't right. Someone would say 1 and 1 is 3 and everyone would write it down. You'd see it in the press the next day, a couple weeks later being Wired. You're like, this is crazy. Well, now we're at a point where people know what they're talking about, their motivations may be different. So really, when you see people on stage these days, you know, I know Jeff and crew at Black Hat take pride on not having vendor pitches up here and people talking about, hey, look how cool my product is. It's amazing how well you can disguise a vendor pitch when you try hard enough. It's really amazing. So by day, I'm a dirty consultant. I work for Booz Allen Hamilton, and by night, I'm the founder of the Shmoo Group. I still like to consider myself fairly unbiased. I'm talking about a subject that's going to be unpopular. I've gotten into arguments with good friends about this particular subject. Screaming contest, as a matter of fact, in my own basement. And I think it's worth noting, if you disagree with me today, feel free to point it out, and let's have some discussion about it. So there's 2 things we're going to try to accomplish. The first is we're going to talk about what is trusted computing, and let's make a case for it. You know, let's figure out why trusted computing is useful. Let's not talk about, we'll talk about some of the evils and things, but honestly, there's a lot of good that can happen with this technology. And I want to try to demonstrate some of that, give you examples, and give you a better understanding of what this technology is and isn't. You know, there is no evil bit. Like, oh, you had it set to evil. Click, for those that remember that Simpsons episode. You know, there is no little evil switch in the back of this stuff. The second is we want to be able to demonstrate TPM on a MacBook. So hopefully we'll get to that depending on how long everything else takes. And hopefully we'll have some good arguments along the way. Oh, and there's actually some code. So this is my anecdotal diagram of the brief history of InfoSec for the last 50 years. You know, we've been solving a problem at a kind of a linear scale, throwing money at it, academic time. It turns out the whole problem just keeps getting bigger. You know, I like to think we're getting closer to solving all the problems. We're closer to solving the problems we had 10 or 15 years ago, and the new problems that we have today, we're nowhere near solving. Security and service-oriented architectures, anyone? If you want to talk about that afterwards, we're in our infancy about that. You know, we can't figure out how to write, you know, an IP driver properly. You know, I want to see you go write code at an enterprise level in some service-oriented architecture properly. Let's figure that problem out. That'll be, again, we'll have it solved in 10 or 15 years. You know, and again, it's funny what happens when you're chasing a possible dream, how profitable it can become. So, what are the current trends? First of all, we got defense in depth. You know, this is certainly, you know, these threat management, I guess that's what they call them, threat management devices that are IDS, IPS, firewalls, antivirus, all in one box. You know, those are really in vogue these days. You know, that's layered defense at the network layer like you can't believe. You're like, we're just slapping everything together. So the real problem, though, is we've got unsolvable issues at the base of the problem that all we're doing is applying Band-Aids to. And so defense in depth is an admission that we can't solve the core problems, so let's layer on a bunch of security until we've slathered on enough stuff that the cake that I made looks like a cake as opposed to the goo that popped out of the cake pan and broke into a million pieces. Access to systems is access to data. You know, if you have physical access to a system, you own it, right? This is not a challenging thing. We have boot disks these days. You pop it in, you go download the local database of the passwords, you crack them, poof, and you're in. You know, Hikari and crew have taken malicious slave devices to a new level. You know, you plug in devices, they auto-own stuff. It's really neat, kind of fun. And transactions generally are trusted at a network level, right? I mean, we're talking about things that are secure between two kind of vague endpoints, but not all the way down to the piece of hardware that it was actually running on. So, how do we get here? This was a paper released by Butler Lampson, who is you know, a great kind of InfoSec CS researcher from the early 70s, wrote these lines and talked about, here's why we want to put protection mechanisms on computers. And basically it goes into multi-level security, need for hardware security to enforce data separation, object-based access control. You know, this would be a contemporary paper today. You know, we haven't solved these problems. Same problem that we had back in 1971. It's remarkable how little has changed. Oh, this was supposed to be an animation and it wasn't. So the answer's at the bottom. I apologize. my PowerPoint foo has gone out the window today due to how I'm feeling. Anyway, I'll give you a minute to read this. Yeah, thank you. October 1972, if you want to cut to the punchline. You know, this is the problems the Air Force was having in October of 1972. And, you know, they were saying, hey, we're, you know, having all these disclosures, we can't write good software, people are breaking into it, they're poking and prodding us. If you read through this document, it's a big document. If you redact out all the system names, PDP-11 or whatever the hell they were running back then, the rest of the document still is contemporary. It's probably the same problems the Air Force is having today. You know? This is no different. We haven't solved the goddamn thing. 1972, we're 35 years on. Congratulations, guys, this is where we're at. Search for the Holy Grail. You know, so this is like AI. You know, you talk about AI in the 50s. Oh, in 5 years we'll have computers that do all the thinking for us. We'll just write symbolic languages that do all the heavy lifting, like Lisp. You know, Lisp was supposed to be the answer to the God, the universe, and everything. You just take the world knowledge book, encode it into Lisp, and it was all symbolic. And then you write a program that thought like a human, and then and we'd have these little automatons running around doing all our work for us, and we'd be sipping margaritas on the beach. Turns out it's not that easy. Turns out that AI was more of a game of horsepower than it was elegance, right? People thought, oh, if we make these really elegant languages, things will be fantastic. Well, what you really needed to do is codify the world's knowledge in minute detail in massive databases, and then write really complex heuristics to get things to actually make sense and be able to have artificially intelligent-like decisions. 1950, that wasn't really possible. I don't know how many people saw the 50th anniversary of the hard drive was a couple days ago, and the hard drive was 50 megabytes, and it was the size of 2 refrigerators. So, you know, even before Wikipedia, I think we can assume that the world's knowledge, you know, exceeded 50 megabytes. So, you know, MLS is a similar thing. The idea here is that you've got multiple domains of security running concurrently on one operating system, and the operating system can basically enforce objects not to talk to each other or only exchange certain types of information. It's, you know, if you were to, in a vacuum design, how would I build the most secure system in the world? You would come up with MLS. This is just, that's the thinking. And so it's a fantastic idea. It's like AI. Hey, it sounds fantastic. Turns out when they dreamed this up, it was really freaking hard. You know, in the late 60s, early 70s, when this idea first kind of really was kicking around, it was very difficult to do MLS. Well, you know, there were some results that came out of all the littered corpses. Operating systems are complicated. You know, shocker. I know, I got the Windows Vista DVD that they're giving away, I think, over at the Microsoft booth. It's a behemoth of an operating system. Linux is a behemoth of an operating system, for those that hadn't noticed. I compiled a Linux kernel for the first time in forever the other day, and I noticed like the tarball exploded, and then it was like 350 megs of source code or some shit. And then it compiles out, and I have like almost a gigabyte of kernel goo stored in user source. I'm like, holy, that's the kernel. Like, wow. I bought a bigger drive. It was fantastic. Software developers don't know how to write secure code. It's the truth. You know, there are people in this room who get paid to audit code for a living, and they get paid well, and there aren't nearly enough of them because software developers write crappy code, period. there's this kind of crazy thing that software developers generally have concerns like time, money, how much money you spend to write it. Quality, the third part of that little triangle, kind of falls off the map a lot of times. Further, we're letting people out of school who don't have a clue how to write secure code. They might know how to compile in OpenSSL support and fake out some crypto protocol and do the worst implementation of SSL imaginable, but they don't really have a solid understanding of how to write secure code. And ultimately, without some trusted hardware on which you can layer on security assertions, the best thing you can do is layer defense in depth. You say, well, at the baseline, I give up because we haven't been able to do physical, hardware security. So we'll start a little bit above that, where it's already really complicated, and then watch it blossom up from the operating systems, the applications, and the network, and then we'll slap some firewalls on that, and we'll call that security. So let's go ahead, 40 years here. 2000, DRM emerges. Content is king. Everyone thought, AOL Time Warner was going to be the granddaddy Uber organization of all time, right? Taking together the best of the internet, AOL, and Time Warner, and ultimately you're supposed to have this amazing capability. So I think we all know DRM. You're cryptographically protecting some chunk of data so that content providers can control who can see it, where it gets seen, shared, and all that kind of stuff. DRM is not perfect. The DRM techniques that have come out in wide use can be subverted very easily when it's software only. For the debugging folks, the folks who are over watching Hallbar or Litchfield or somewhere else right now could tell you, hey, it's just software, right? We just shim out the parts that we don't need, and hey, everything, we watch where all the mystery bits are stored, we decrypt it all and write it down. Or if you're really interested, you can just, if it's an audio, you just pipe it out to another audio device. You just transcode the damn thing, and oh, look, I have transcoded audio. Who the hell cares if it's now an MP3 and not AAC? And even hardware-based systems can be, pwned. You look at DVD John and what he was able to do to the entire DVD industry. Thank God. How many people burned or ripped DVDs on a PC? Did it hurt? It was a difficult process. How many people ripped DVDs on a Mac? Was it easy? Yeah. There's this program called Handbrake. Brother, you hit a button. Oh, look. Every time I put a DVD in, it just rips it down to disk. It's fantastic. It's a one-button rip. I encourage you, not that I'm a Mac zealot, but to go buy a Mac. So, guess what? DRM is cool, in case you hadn't heard. Now, there's a little leap of faith here. This is a transitivity thing, so you kind of have to follow it. First of all, according to a recent survey of college students, iPod are now cooler than beer. Okay, I don't know what school these people were from, but apparently somewhere in the Midwest. No offense to the Midwesterners in the room. Anyway, the iPod, basically was the basis for iTunes Music Store, right? iTunes Music Store was made possible because Apple came up with a DRM mechanism that was tenable to the content providers. So they all said, hey, this is fantastic. We'll let you put up songs to a bucket pop and sell them to people in a mass market. February 2006, 1 billion songs have been sold up at iTunes Music Store. I don't know what constitutes cool, but 1 billion of anything generally is. I don't know how many albums Christina Aguilera has sold, but I assume it's not nearly 1 billion. So DRM is also cooler than Christina Aguilera. So through transitivity, Apple made DRM cool, right? Okay, so that's leave it fair. There's a lot of transitivity here. Clearly make transitivity jumps. There's some lossy bits to it, but you just have to bear with. What does that have to do with hardware? Well, Apple just made trusted hardware section cool. These PC and Mac commercials, wow, they're funny. I have people coming up to me that I haven't talked to in years, and you're a Mac user, right? Yeah. Have you seen? Yes, I've seen the commercials. They're funny. They're cute. Yes, little guys in the box. My parts are over there. Ha ha ha. And they think it's great. They're gonna. I mean, they're not gonna dominate the market, but they're clearly gonna go from 3% to 6% or something of the market. I mean, this is gonna be a big deal. This push to Intel was a fantastic freaking brainstorm that probably anybody could have told them was a good idea, but Steve Jobs crafted it into like it was divine, intervention for him. Virgin Mary came down and told me, hey, you should go to Intel. Don't go to Intel. Enter the MacBook Pro. So Apple, when they switched to Intel, clearly this is a threat to their position in the market, right? They went back and forth in this, you can clone us, you can't clone us, you can clone us, you can't clone us crap. And they haven't been able to, sell a clone Mac for, what, 6 years now? 7 years? It's been a while. 99, I guess they got rid of the whole clone market. And so they've got certainly a captive base when it comes to selling hardware and running Apple software on it. Well, when you go to an x86 platform, you're at risk of losing that. So Apple wanted to find, I'm saying this in speculation. I do not have inside information. I don't work for Apple, but it appears that they wanted to find the particular bits about what makes Macs, user-friendly and useful, that were going to keep them dominating the hardware market and protect people from running it on a general purpose x86. And the big thing that they had during this migration is this emulator called Rosetta, which does real-time rewriting of PowerPC opcodes, x86 opcodes. And, well, that's pretty cool. It's pretty damn cool. I was originally going to run this on an x86 PowerBook. I'm currently running it on a PowerPC, though, due to various reasons. But, I can run Microsoft Office as fast or faster as I ran it on my G4 PowerBook. It's pretty cool. And Apple knew this, so they protect it with a TPM. So when Rosetta instantiates itself, it goes and looks for this trusted chip that's on the motherboard. It says, hey, are you there? The chip says, yeah, I'm here. Oh, okay, then I'll start then. And it goes off and it starts. This Russian hacker Maxis repeatedly released bypasses for this. Okay, you could then boot. You could always boot and run OS X on an x86 box as long as you didn't care about this PowerPC thing or a few other odds and ends that hooked into the TPM. Maxis just chopped it all off at the knees, or as Mike Wynn would say, kicked it in the nuts, and it worked. Apple came after him. He changed domains half a dozen times. I'm not sure if I tried to find the Maxis patches a few weeks ago, and I actually couldn't track them down anymore. So Apple, don't underestimate Apple lawyers. Apple lawyers and Microsoft lawyers could have like a cage match, throwing subpoenas at each other and everything. It would actually be pretty good. I think it would be pretty evenly matched. So anyway, then here's my PowerPoint diagram in case you couldn't get from my sound, track what the hell's going on. Backing up a step. So I threw out this acronym, TPM, and I didn't explain it, which is a big no-no, right? So let's back up and talk about trusted computing. So this thing called the Trusted Computing Group, which used to be the Trusted Computing Platform Alliance, TCPA. It's an industry group, right? You pay the money and you can join, that set standards of trusted computing systems and architectures. Pretty broad group of folks bought into it. Most of the big boys, Intel, AMD, Microsoft, all these people. They used to be focused solely on the development of this trusted module, the TPM, that ran on, you just soldered on the motherboard, and it did its thing. Now it's got a broader scope. They're looking at infrastructure, how this impacts infrastructure, mobile devices, PC clients, servers, software stack. It's pretty important. You're going to use a module. It's kind of hard, turns out, to access a device directly all the time and write hex codes to it and off of it and not have any abstractions. So they've actually got a pretty robust standard for software stacks. Trusted network connector, which I'll get into in a minute, and other odds and ends. In general, what they're trying to do is say, hey, when we have this capability that we've all been dreaming about for 45 years, what can we really do with it? Okay? Well, at first blush, people think, well, clearly you're going to violate my privacy because everyone who's not at this conference wants to violate our privacy. Don't you know? It's only paranoia, or it's not paranoia if they're actually out to get you, right? Jeez. So everybody gets all wrapped around the axle about, holy crap, this is going to be the worst thing ever. Okay, so first of all, let's talk about what they have to say about privacy. Now, granted, this is their own Kool-Aid, so take this with a grain of salt. Excuse me. They basically say, hey, the owner can opt in to how this thing is used. Okay, they can choose, how they want to use it, how they want to, information gets exposed, how the interaction with software happens. Now, let's be real clear on one term here, the owner, okay? The owner of your personal laptop generally is you as an individual. The owner of your enterprise laptop that you got from your place of work, well, that's not yours. You should have no expectation of any privacy on your enterprise devices anyway, right? Just because you tunnel out over SSH all your porn doesn't make it okay, okay? Just little FYI. Someone finally shut the door. I guess either I was too loud or they were too loud. It's not like you download a piece of software download iTunes Music, or iPods, whatever the hell, iTunes. There, I figured it out, wrestled that sentence to the ground. You download iTunes. It's not like iTunes takes ownership of your TPM and says, mine, and hides all it from you, and there's this quiet cone of silence where it all executes that. No, actually, as the owner of the device, you can control what happens. You can make the keys that it accesses in there. You can export them. You can put them on another machine. You can do all this kind of stuff. Note, we're in a time when backing things up becomes really important. You know, Apple, when you buy a bunch of music, they're always saying, hey, don't forget, you've just spent hundreds of dollars here. Back up your music, because if your hard drives crash, you're kind of screwed. And it's going to become even worse. Like, you're actually going to have Mom, Pa, Kettle worried about backing up the cryptographic keys that are stored in the TPM. That's going to be strange, and that's going to be some user interface issues that need to be tackled. I'm all over the road today. Whatever I'm on is really kicking in. Chips are manufactured by a variety of vendors. The TPM on its own, like I said, it doesn't do anything. It sits there, okay? You boot it today. It's in, anyone have like a IBM T43 or an IBM T50 series? Got one guy down there. They've got TPMs built into them, but not necessarily by default does it do anything unless you have software that accesses it. So I know IBM's got some capability to actually modify what's on there. Apple, it turns out, doesn't. By default, there's no way to interface with a TPM, which is kind of a pain in the butt, which is something that we're going to show here in a bit, actually, how you can do it. So higher level systems, such as boot managers, operating systems, applications, have to make use of this thing to be of any good. So the evil bit isn't set until the applications try to access it, okay? Just to be clear, it's not evil, not from the get-go. Here's what's inside the chip. You got your standard issue I/O bus, you got some RAM to do stuff in. You got this thing called the PCR, your platform configuration registers. And this is particular information about your system that's unique to your system. The manufacturer, serial numbers, types of peripherals on the main board, types of peripherals hooked up to the device in general. What these registers ultimately describe is a unique system that's yours, okay? So these PCRs end up being used by other functionality to say, hey, if I want to bind something specifically to this host, I'm going to use some of the information in the PCR to be able to bind it there. Or if I wanted to say something about what's on this host or the integrity of this host, I'm going to reference all this information so somebody knows, absolutely, this is the host that I'm talking about, okay? That's not something as a user you can go in and modify. This is not like you can delete it, you can reset it, but you can't just load in arbitrary information into this thing and say, oh, here's, I want a hash that pops out of this to be hex 0535, whatever. No, it doesn't work like that. You also have this identity, attestation identity key. So part of the idea with the TPM is that you can tell other devices, things about yourself. If you're okay, if the chip's okay, if the operating system's okay, all these kinds of things. So there's a key store there, and that's, again, unique to your TPM that signs all those messages. There's program code, which is basically custom stuff that the manufacturer can put in there to do some of this heavy lifting with respect to attestation, things of that nature. There's a RNG, note, not PRNG. This is actually a hardware random number generator. Woohoo! We don't have to have these esoteric arguments of how good random is. These vendors all have certified RNGs or should have certified RNGs on their TPM. There's a SHA-1 engine. Yeah, we can get into arguments about how good SHA-1 is, but there's a SHA-1 engine. Key generation engine. Here's the opt-in thing. I temporarily deactivated it. And then there's this execution engine that's basically general purpose kind of CPU. It's where stuff gets done. So when you want to interact with the TPM, for those that have done smart card work, it's very similar to how you interact with a smart card. This is not something that's sitting on the side churning on its own. You have to ask it a question. Sorry. Test. This is where I do it. You have to ask it a question in order to get an answer back from it. So in this case, the application will make a library or socket call to the software stack. The software stack then talks to the low-level driver that's chip-specific. The driver will send a datagram, a hex datagram, and then the TPM does its thing, kicks the datagram back up, and then it obviously pops back up through the food chain. So the datagram on the left, hopefully, Well, anyway, the one datagram that you saw was the, if you can remember, bonus points, anyone that can remember the 12 hex digits that were there. That was the startup datagram, which is a particularly thorny one for me because I spent a lot of time trying to get the TPM on the MacBook Pro to work right, and it kept just flaking out saying, hey, I've been deactivated, and much like our VGA screens. And I couldn't figure out why, and it was because when the chip comes online, the operating system will send an init, which basically turns it on, but never actually started it. And so all the other codes he sent to the thing were like, it didn't know, just responded with, I don't know what the hell you're trying to do. And then one day I found a little esoteric statement that said, oh, you have to start the damn thing. And it literally is, it's one of those things, like it's just 12 hex digits, you send it, boop, and it comes online. Real quick here, the first line is basically the type of message it is. Second line is the size. Third and fourth line are just these, basically that's the arguments that you're sending. 99 is a startup, and 01 is a type of startup. In this case, starting fresh, popping fresh, just going from the get-go. There are a lot of commands the TPM understands. The document is for the TCG that describes this is a couple hundred pages long with all the different commands so that it can understand. I've tried to break them down into a high level and apparently running into each other breakdown. There's the admin idea, state saving, self-test. That you can do these full self-tests where if they doesn't test properly, it shuts itself back down. You can take ownership, you can clear all the chip, you just basically say, oh, starting over, sorry, screwed it up. Key management, you can export and import keys. There are two types of keys, migratable and non-migratable. Non-migratable keys, as you might guess, you can't take off the chip. So those are the ones that if something's encrypted with that and your chip goes bye-bye for whatever reason, or the computer goes bye-bye, that data is gone, okay? Real good to know if a key is migratable or not migratable. Crypto, you can bind data. They had to invent new terms, apparently. Bind means you're encrypting it, usually using a non-exportable key. So this is where you're encrypting a chunk of data, and now it's bound to that key that's in the box, in the TPM, and you can't do anything about it. You can sign stuff. You can seal stuff. Seal's really exciting, because even if you used a migratable key when you were binding it, well, now you're binding it not just with that, but with the PCR data. So now it's specifically tied to your hardware. That's really fun stuff. Sealed sign, so now we've got encrypted sign data that's bound to your device, hashing, and numbered RNG capability. Session management, there is an understanding of sessions. It's, again, kind of like smart cards have channels. You can, create sessions, load context. There's transport management, hoo-ha you can do. And then in general, you have the ability, some of them are field upgradable. You can delegate some authority. You can, I'm not sure dump NVRAM, but you can certainly clear the hell out of it. Examining the Apple TPM. So here's where I'm going to actually show you a little bit about what's going on in the Mac. It's not the grandest demo in the world, but what we did, let me see here. I'm not actually going to demo it yet, so give me a minute. They all use a TPM from Infineon, a company called Infineon. It's a version 1.1b chip. This is important because Vista and all the TPM capabilities of Vista, like BitLocker and things, want a 1.2 TPM chip. Anyone know if they actually have a system with a 1.2 chip in it? Bueller? I couldn't find one. We looked around, we found a lot with 1.1b, a lot. So there's a bit of an issue there. Just from a Vista migration path for everyone who has to care about that in the future, thankfully I probably don't. If you're going to do anything with a TPM on Vista, it's going to be hardware refresh, period. You're going to be putting in new motherboards or buying new systems if you want to use any TPM capabilities for Microsoft Vista. But I think that kind of goes in line anyway with what Microsoft's plan is, which is everyone has to have a bajillion gigs of memory and a couple terabytes of hard drive space in order to install it. So no offense to the Microsofties in the room. I apologize. Just had again, if you hadn't noticed, I'm on a Mac, so I kind of had a poke. Apple doesn't really have an interface exposed to allow you to poke the TPM, and it goes hand in hand with the rest of the way they've done stuff. For a long time, they didn't have capability to poke the Bluetooth stack. If you were a coder and you wanted to do something with Bluetooth, you had two options. You could do what the Wi-Fi guys did and reverse engineer the protocol stack that they used and write your own hooks, or basically make a .h file so you could hook it. Or you fired up the wizard. So if you wanted to find a new device, you would actually just call this thing and it'd start a wizard and a little box would pop up. And then the wizard would return a device, which was a real pain in the butt. TPM had nothing. I found little hints of where it was. Again, I hadn't been able to find Maxis's patch, so I'm not crystal clear on where what kernel extensions were probing the TPM, and frankly, after 3 or 4 days of poking around in the guts of every kernel extension of my PowerBook, I gave up. Never fear though, we've got code to examine it anyway. So what we did is there's a Ubuntu live CD made by a group at mactellinux.org. First of all, booting under a new MacBook Pro is a very different ordeal. It uses EFI instead of BIOS. And EFI is a different kind of animal altogether. So the Ubuntu Live CD is really strange because it doesn't look like a normal Linux Live CD would. I tried to create a Live CD for distribution here and actually ended up failing miserably and burned about 40 coasters in the process. What we ended up doing instead was releasing a tarball that you can blast onto a USB disk, which is a lot more convenient because then it's, say, persistent storage versus a live CD, and then just run around with your little USB disk that you can have and boot up whenever you want. So you can have your Linux booting on your MacBook Pro whenever you desire. So that's released. It's on that website, tpm.shmoo.com. It's a little big. It's like 680 megs or some nonsense. All the instructions are on the website to download it. But anyway, so we customized it. What we did was made all the TPM stuff work. I upgraded all the Ubuntu packages so there's no security vulnerabilities. No known security vulnerabilities in it. And then we made the TPM stuff work out the gate, so everything comes online properly. It's all compiled, kernel modules work, all that good stuff. So anyway, the way that it works is that there's 2 different ways to interface with the TPM under Linux. You have the legacy libTPM from IBM. This is just standard issue library, right? It abstracts the calls down there. You can turn the thing on, turn the thing off. You can do whatever you need to do, and it accesses the TPM directly. The more kind of contemporary way of doing it is this utility called Trousers, trousers.sf.net, and they've got a daemon that runs that basically grabs the TPM device by the face, and the only way to communicate with the device from that point forward is a socket call to the TCSD daemon. So you get to do a little socket coding. So they have a pile of utils there that you can run and access the Infineon TPM. One thing of note, the default libTPM from IBM does not have a function to start the thing, so I had to write one. So if you download this image and you're playing around with it, there's no reason this shouldn't work on any TPM-capable laptop. You should be able to download this thing and run it on anything. I had to write a startup thing. I'm going to show it off in a minute that will, actually make things work properly. So, all right. So it's real quick demo time. So just so you don't think I'm kidding around with you, let's give a uname-a. So here's this Mactel 2.6.16.1 Linux kernel. It's kind of far down at the bottom. I apologize. I can make noises while I do stuff because that always makes it better. There we go. Right now, if we look in here, this is the utils directory. There's like a TPM demo file. We try to run it, and fails with error 38, which what I eventually decoded was, the thing's not turned on, smart guy. So what we do instead is TPM startup successful. Now we can do a demo. Look, magic happened. Hex flew by. I must know what I'm talking about. That's it. Oh, hey. All right. Yeah, thank you. I got one round of applause for screenfuls of hex. Is that what all the demos are supposed to look like anyway? More convoluted, the better. Honestly, this demo, you can read through the code, but it's basically, it's getting the thing going. It's resetting the chip just to make sure everything's clean. It gets the capabilities from the chip. There's, a breakdown of what the capabilities are. You can look them up. I didn't have time to write the magic decoder ring here so that this was all ASCII pretty. And at the end here, there's this big blob of goo, all Fs. These are PCR reads, trying to read the PCR registers that it has the authority to read. Right now, they're not initialized to anything, so they're all just a bunch of Fs. So Apple hasn't gone through and initialized this. I haven't done the take ownership thing yet because I really don't want to break the PowerPC capability that this box has right now, especially coming into Black Hat. I didn't know what kind of capabilities I was going to need to have. when I get home, I'm actually then just going to try to screw around the TPM as much as I can until the PowerPC stuff breaks, which could be 1 command or it could be 50, at which point I'll have a little PayPal donation thing if you want to buy me a new MacBook. So at the end here is this big blob, and this is actually an important key. This is the public encryption key, and it's what uniquely identifies this host. This is the public key for that. It's not actually a full-blown cert. You can export it as, basically OpenSSL understood, PEM or something, but it's just a key blob. And so if you want to, ultimately, if you need to encrypt anything and shove it onto this, if you need to, whatever, shove data onto it or generate key material or import key material, this is the public key that you would use to do that. This uniquely identifies my system right now. Everyone has a unique one of these. So, if you're really interested, you could try to write this down and then figure out something to do with it, but I don't think it would do you any good. Anyway, so this is, it's funny because they call it a public key, but they still call it sensitive. It shouldn't be released outside the system. And yet, here's this interface just to probe it and snarf all the data off of it. So, anyway, there's the long modulus. It's the PUBIC, which is really bad name. Anyway, so honestly, that's the whole demo, if you will. There are a lot of utilities here. You can load key, you can dump the key out, you can disable it, you can create it, you can do it. The kicker is, and what I'm going to cut to the chase on, because we're 10 minutes short on time, we've concentrated a lot on what the bad stuff is. I'll get to the stuff in a second. We've concentrated on what the bad stuff is. DRM, man, I'm going to lose my privacy. Well, God, guys, let's look and see what Apple and Microsoft and all these people have done with the TPM. They at least have products out there that we can actually go and do useful things with. BitLocker is, like EFS on steroids for Vista. And then Apple's made it a core part of their product offering. What do we have in the open source community? Right, good. Glad we got that out of the way. This is a huge opportunity, right? And we need to get our thumb out of our butts with respect to being all worried about, the privacy ramifications and all that stuff. Because trust me, there are people that are going to solve that. EFF is going to crawl all over people. And the ACLU and any other group that you can think of is going to be defending privacy and our ability to control our systems, whatever. And that's fantastic. They're good at it. Let them do it. As geeks, we're just smelly, long-haired guys who get in the way. Let's focus on making the world a more secure place. Let's get some tools written. Let's educate people about this. Let's actually try to make a difference. Let's give demos next year of, hey, here's cool TPM-enabled stuff that we've done. I've made EFS for Linux that uses the TPM for key storage. Ooh, neat. I got a firewall that stores all my IPsec keys in the TPM. Ooh, neat. Let's talk about that. Let's do stuff. Soapbox can get kicked off the stage now. Real quick, Trusted Network Connect, rather than trying to solve the entire thing, doing MLS from the get-go, they're taking some baby steps. Network access is the problem, pretty common. There's a NAC talk going on right now in some other room that you've missed out, so I didn't tell you about that until the end. But the idea is, how do you control access to a network and your enterprise? Well, oftentimes devices don't strongly authenticate themselves. There's a password, something advanced as a password. TNC is basically 802.1x that has, basically the capability to tie into the TPM and use these keys that are stored internally to authenticate the device and the capabilities of the device to the rest of the enterprise. Pretty straightforward. Juniper already has it, and others already have solutions that are TNC compliant. Here's a really bad graphic I lifted from the website that I'm not even going to look at. Other capabilities, data at rest, obviously we've talked about BitLocker. This could be done on any platform though. Why doesn't Disk Utility and OS X make use of this for its encrypted file systems? I have no earthly idea, except it seems like Apple's not trying to use the TPM as a differentiator, trying to use it to protect their market share. Why doesn't Linux have any of this kind of capability? Because we're all too busy screaming about the privacy ramifications. Crypto API, that's the one thing that's nice, is you can go to the Trousers website and download a compiled version of OpenSSL that does use the TPM for all of its hoo-ha. So you don't have to rely on software. Pretty neat. And so in that case, it should be pretty trivial to compile your applications against it. I've compiled a few just to test them out, and they work fine. So I recommend going and playing with that if you can. Remote attestation, this is again when you can tell a remote system, hey, I'm this good, I'm that good. And I got a table on the next page that will explain it. Trusted boot. follow the logic. You have the TPM. You have this controlled key, right? And secure cryptographic capability. Now I have a secure bootloader. And it verifies itself, the TPM verifies it, and says, this is the bootloader I intended to load. Then the bootloader says, oh, I'm going to go load a signed kernel and verify that this is the signed kernel I intend to load. Then the signed kernel is going to load signed drivers, and signed drivers load signed applications. Note, signed does not equal secure. We had this battle with Microsoft, years ago when they started having all these signed code capabilities. Well, we know that, okay? I think we've internalized the issue that just because you sign something doesn't make it secure. However, if you've actually looked at the thing and you believe it to be secure and then you signed it, well, now we got a decent starting point. If I've got a bootloader that's been signed and then I use the TPM to verify it, well, I'm in a better state than if I'm just using some uncontrolled bootloader and hoping someone isn't booting from a floppy disk or a CD-ROM. Types of attestation really quick. There's attestation by the TPM. Basically, it says, there's a TPM here, and I know a secret. Shh, don't tell anyone. Attestation to the platform. This basically says, proves that the endpoint can be trusted to report its integrity. It's not saying its integrity is good. It's not saying it hasn't been owned. It just says, I'm going to tell you the right answer. Now, the right answer may not be one you like, but I'm at least going to tell you the right answer. Attestation of the platform is basically saying, I am this good. I have this much integrity. Now, again, this is all software-based. The reporting ultimately becomes software-based, so you have to make sure that this attestation reporting is protected on its way out. But ultimately, this is saying, hey, I believe myself to be integral, or I've got some problem. And authentication of the platform, this is device authentication. This is the TNC type capability. So the bad. There's a lot of opportunity for loss of content control, failed hardware. We've talked about a lot of these. Users need to deal with key material. Users can't send encrypted email to each other, right? So we got to make the key material handling an easy thing for them. And operating systems may get territorial. There's some concerns that Windows Genuine Advantage, for instance, would be basically say, oh, I won't upgrade your OS because you're running Firefox. Like that's the new conspiracy theory of the week, because Microsoft wants to piss off everybody, right? No, I'm not trying to offend Microsoft for all the Microsofties in the room. I'm just saying there's a lot of people who are convinced you're going to use this for like the ultimate epitome of evil. Like one day, you ever see the Futurama with Mom controlling the robots for one day? She's like, world domination! And all the robots go off and do world domination. Like Microsoft's going to send, ding, one packet into the internet, and also all the computers will pop up off the desk, they're beating all the users with it. Ain't going to happen like that. The good, trusted boot can make a big dent in controlling malicious code, network access, protect mobile media, data at rest, blah, we talked about all this. The ugly, people distrust this stuff, right? And we can't afford to do it any longer. We've been solving the same problem for 40 years, and now we have the capability to actually do something about it, so let's do something about it. I'm not a good coder. Can't code to save my damn life, telling you guys the honest truth. If I compiled TPM Startup, that program I ran, I can't tell you how many times I had to compile it to make it work right. It's probably 15 lines of C code. I'm not the guy who's going to be up here making all these products. Man, I encourage you to either you yourself or if you got friends that can code, let's go off and make cool stuff with this. Let's make things better. Let's start to solve these 40-year-old problems. Again, you'll have to have 1.2 if you actually want to do anything. So ubiquitous deployment 1.2 is probably 3 years away. Trusted computing, lots of things are shipping with it, huge capabilities, blah, and rant. Any questions or comments? I'm not aware of any vendors that have released upgrades, and I assume the upgrades are signed, so you can't just write your own and drop it on. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, there's been so little interest, I think, ultimately in the end user, from the end user population, that there really hasn't been much need to upgrade them in the field yet. Other questions? So the migration is occurring, so yeah. Right, so the concern is, hey, my hard drive crashed and I lost all my data. Can you recover the hard drive? And they'll be like, sure, but do you still have the TPM that was associated with? The user, what it's going to force is the people that are making backup software are going to have to find a way to export the keys, and you're going to have to find ways that are reasonable to you. You could bundle it right along with the data if you don't care about it, or you could, have it stored on separate media or something like that. But there'll certainly be lawsuits, and somebody will steal a VA laptop and steal the keys, and then steal 3 other laptops, and then go own the whole VA. It'll be great. So anyway, I know we're getting short on time, so I'm going to call it now. But if you have questions or concerns, I'll be the one looking green outside drinking orange juice as soon as this is over. So thanks all.